A lot is going on in the world, including this lovely thing called heat. That is definitely going on in the world, but there are a number of other things happening as well. And I'm going to get to some of those, including some that are impacting the sports world. And we'll see who else pops in. We've got a few folks that are here that are our regular panelists, and we'll see what they've got to say about a number of things that are happening in the world. And hopefully, Sasha will come in and give some clarity on some things that are going on, including going on in his hometown and all along those lines, because definitely the Russian attacks are underway in Odessa for the third night in a row. And a part of what is going on is that Russia is striking Ukraine grain after ending that sea deal and all in that space. And a lot of folks are saying that this is jolting the world grain market. So we're going to definitely have some conversation around that. And like I said, I hope Sasha comes in and can clarify and talk about some of the things from his perspective and all along that kind of way. And in other things that are going on, the Swedish embassy in Baghdad was stormed and set alight after the Koran burning the plans that were put out there and all along those lines. So that is definitely something that is going on as protesters stormed the Swedish embassy in Iraq over the Koran burning plan. So that is something that we are seeing in the news, and folks on the panel may have some thoughts around that as they have some ties to that part of the world and that particular religion and all in that kind of way. So we'll see if we get into a discussion around that or not. But other things that are going on, and we'll see if Steve comes in, because he definitely has some Indian roots, as do some other folks that are here on our panel. But India is having some outrage over some things that are going on in that part of the world, as India's Modi, the leader of that country, is breaking silence over ethnic violence in Malabar after videos are showing a mob molesting a woman. So that is something else that we are seeing in the world and will be a possible topic of discussion. And it seems like every time there is a world sporting event, there is some sort of violence or something else that colors what is going on. So I do know that over there in a shared effort, Australia and New Zealand are about to host the Women's World Cup. And during that time, and as they're getting prepared for that, a gunman went off and killed two in Auckland hours before the opening ceremony. So parts of Auckland have been cordoned off after that shooting, and they are saying that actually the number that I'm seeing is actually further from the New Zealand Herald, and this was from a few hours ago. They're saying that 3 have been left dead in that particular case. So we're going to see what folks have to say about that particular story as well, and any thoughts that folks have about some of the violence against women, some of the things that are going on in the world, and definitely how sports can be a very political time for things to happen and all in that kind of space. And Spain is having an election, and their election on Sunday, that's right, it's coming up on this Sunday, folks are saying are going to be pitting two folks that are on the leftist side and two that are on the right side. So they're saying it's going to pit two leftists versus two rightist parties. And I've got to get with Nick and see if we can't find that gentleman that I think was from Spain, that was one of the attorneys and all in that kind of space when we used to have regularly the Legal Eagle or the legal show that we used to do, and all in that kind of way. So we'll see if we can get Mr. I believe it was Spano, if I remember correctly, but I could have the name totally wrong. But we'll try to see if we can't get him or somebody else from Spain onto the show to share some assessments and some thoughts around what is going on in that part of the globe. And definitely in that same line, in another part of the world, there is Kenya opposition set for a second day of tax hike protests, and our six are dead there as Kenya is rocked by nationwide anti-government protests over gas taxes, according to Amnesty International. And I do know that we've had some folks here on the network that have visited that part of the world, including Shaquille and Barbara H. Smith. So I'm sure that they may have some thoughts at some point or another. I might invite Barbara at some point to come on and share what they are thinking about what is going on in that part of the globe. So a lot of things are happening. And of course, things are happening on the United States level as well. So I might get to a couple of those stories, and then I'll bring in our esteemed panel and see what they've got to say about a couple of these things as well. So definitely a lot of folks are looking at the Carlee Russell case, which is going on as well, and that is somebody that was involved in a kidnapping, and she is claiming that kidnappers took photos of her naked, according to what some of the police are saying. And we might have some folks that have followed that story more closely, and we'll see if they've got any insight and all in that kind of way. And there is some talk about Speaker McCarthy and some of the things that he may have done in terms of deals and conversations with Trump, because definitely he has defended Trump and says that he don't see how he can be found criminally responsible. And I'm guessing that that's around 9/11 and some of the other things that are going on in terms of investigations. And the DOJ says it is assessing the situation along the Texas-Mexico border. Definitely that is going on as well. And a lot of folks are trying to figure out what our policy is in terms of migrants and migrant rights, and also just things in that kind of way. So that's some of the things that I am seeing in the news. There is still no word from North Korea, I should say, on the U.S. soldier who fled across the military border. And one of the things is that some folks, I guess, are saying that it was actually a defection. And we don't oftentimes hear of defections in that way, meaning the opposite way. A lot of times we hear it from the east to the west, but not the west to the east. But apparently the last American to defect to North Korea was from El Paso, according to some experts, and all in that kind of way. And if you want some good news, apparently homicides have declined and car thefts have soared in the first half of 2023. Not necessarily saying that the car thefts is good news, but a survey of 30 U.S. cities shows that nearly 10% drop in homicides in 2023. So that could definitely be some good news for folks to be thinking about and talking about as well. So the other stories that I said I might bring up, and I guess I'll bring it up now, that might be considered lighthearted, even though it is a serious topic. And then I will bring in our panelists and everything. But if you follow social media, you know that there is a various nicknames that can sometimes be very popular for whatever reasons, but a lot of times people like to think of themselves, particularly women and others, as being lionesses and all in that kind of way. So if you follow Facebook or YouTube or a number of other social medias, you will see that that term is used by a lot of people to describe themselves. I would say that it is one of the popular slang terms that is used by people in a positive way to describe themselves. But in this case, it's a real lioness, and it is being running loose in the suburbs of Berlin. So there are definitely an escaped wild animal on the loose in Berlin, and that is prompting an urgent citywide search. So it is not the lioness that some people that are in the single lanes may want to actually see and actually have in their lives, but it is actually the real lioness. And I don't think you want to run into a real lioness in true time and all along those lines. But that was just a quick insight and a quick little bit of a jab and a quasi joke and everything. But I'm going to bring in Debbie Peterson, who is back with us again. So I'm glad that Debbie is here, as well as Shaquille Latimer. And we do have Jatovia here as well. And we do have Lee Newton Rhodes also. So glad that all of you are here. And actually, one of the bosses of the network, Nick Palfeda, is here also. So glad that everybody is here in the house and all along those lines. So that was just some of the news items that I saw and all along those lines. So I just couldn't resist remembering, and Jacoby will know that as well, that if you follow Facebook, you will see sometimes that women, for whatever reasons, like to use that name because it can have some positivity to it as well and everything. But in this case, it's a real one. And no, I'm not trying to have one walk down the streets of Durham and all along those lines. And I don't think Debbie's trying to have one walk down Hawaii or California either. But that's just my thoughts. It would be a scary thought in that respect.
I do have to say to Debbie, I was watching a show last night and I missed it. Debbie, there's no sympathy from us to you at the moment complaining about it being 4 o'clock in the morning. You're in Hawaii, so no sympathy from us at all.
Oh, well. Hey, speaking of lions, my birthday's in August, so I am a lioness. I'm a Leo. And in where I am in California, we've been having interesting incidents with really several mountain lions literally walking down our streets through our backyards in San Luis Obispo, California. So we're getting the odd lioness. And, I never realized a mountain lion is a mountain lion. It's not a bobcat. It's not a little animal. It is a huge lion. So we know what lionesses are in San Luis Obispo County.
Sounds like y'all definitely know what they are and everything. Hey, I was curious, Shaquille, and definitely was wondering your thoughts about that, and Debbie may have some thoughts as well, but as everybody else on this panel. But it seems like every time, and we can go all the way back to the 70s when I was a kid, that there is a major sporting incident, either known terrorist, as was the case in the Olympics of one of those Olympics in the 70s. I think it was 72 or 76 and everything will choose that time to make a attack. And then sometimes the folks that are just, into shootings for whatever reasons will also choose to use it as a springboard for their incidences. And I do know that y'all are having the shared World Cup. I'm actually a fan of soccer, and I've been a fan of women's soccer ever since Mia Hamm and Brandy and a number of others as well. But I was just wondering, what is your thoughts about this incident, and will it color what is going on? Because I know a lot of things have been going on. We had a conversation, just in a casual conversation, about how y'all are, well, meaning the two countries are also trying to have some conversations about making sure that First Nation people are being represented in some of the flags and some of the other things that are going on in terms of making sure that there is representation in the coverage of the way that the celebration is done and all in that space. But I don't know if you have any insights, one, on the attack, and two, on Australia and New Zealand sharing the World Cup, or the Women's World Cup, that is, I guess, starting today and will be running for maybe a week or two.
Well, first of all, I think it's great for the two countries to share it. That we are sister countries, and probably a lot of people around the world didn't know, but New Zealand was actually supposed to be a part of Australia. And most of Australia is actually closer to New Zealand geographically than it is to Western Australia, where I am at the moment. I think it's great for us to share these events. We obviously have a great sporting rivalry. So that's been great. In relation to our Indigenous population, they're not calling themselves First Nations. They prefer to say they were the original custodians. I'm not sure what the difference is that they're going for. I think it's to try and separate themselves from the more American or North American terms that are being used. I don't really have much to say. I think it's positive for them to be involved and represented. I'm concerned that they're the only ones being represented, and everybody else is kind of being told, well, they've been oppressed, and so there's no representation of anything else. And I think that you just need to be careful about getting that balance correct, I think. But for right now, I think it's been a good move. New Zealand has a much better record on this than Australia does, and Australia currently has some massive legal proposals going through. One of them is a thing called the Voice to Parliament. It's quite controversial in Australia, so I think there was some domestic politics between Australia and New Zealand that's at play that I think the worldwide audience wouldn't see. To the shooting that occurred, look, I think the reason why that's such a big story for us, just remember, only 2 people died. Not that that's okay, but only 2 people died. And I hate to say it, but if that was America, it wouldn't even be on the news. So for us, it's a really big deal because we don't actually have shootings here very often. And so when they do happen, they are a really big news story. And in this particular case, I don't think that there's a connection between the sporting event and the shooting that occurred. The government of New Zealand has said that there's no link between the individual, I'm not going to name him, the individual and any terrorist groups, that there's no suggestion of anything like that. There's no suggestion that it was a national security issue. It was a 24-year-old who went in with a shotgun, as I understand it. He shot 2 co-workers, and then he went up, like there was 12 floors on this construction site, and he went up and then shot the gun at various people. And then he died himself. I'm not sure how he died. It hasn't been published whether it was self-inflicted or whether the police shot him or what happened. But that's why it's such a big story. And I would hate for that to be the reflection of New Zealand that is shown, because New Zealand's a beautiful country and a very peaceful country. Far more peaceful than Australia is. They're not as involved in some of the things that Australia gets involved in. And they've stood up for themselves when the United States wanted to put nuclear weapons in New Zealand during the World War. New Zealand said absolutely not. We're not going to have anything nuclear in our country. And they actually defied both Australia and the United States on this issue. And I think they should be commended for that. So I would hate for there to be a negative reflection of New Zealand based on that very, very isolated incident.
I have to agree with you on that, Shaquille. I was married to a Kiwi, and so I'm going to say thank you for being so gracious to the Kiwis as an Australian. And but I lived in Great Britain for 20 years, and I also came to develop that there's almost an aversion to guns. Yeah, sure, shotguns, people hunt, and that's people do that, but there's almost an aversion to guns, and the real thing is that they really just don't have guns in these countries, and so it doesn't happen. That's the elephant in the room. The guns aren't there; they're not available.
Yeah, but we sort of have a lot of.
So there has been some debates about this issue, and we actually do have a fairly high gun ownership level in Australia. People just don't realise it. But it's mostly for farmers and vermin control and things like that. So most people walking around the city don't have guns. And what's really interesting with New Zealand, and I am very kind to New Zealand. I have lived in New Zealand myself. Most of my family that immigrated from Fiji actually went to New Zealand, not to Australia. So Auckland and Wellington are very close to my heart. But another thing that people in Australia will find, people in America will probably be shocked at, is that New Zealand police don't carry guns either. So neither the citizens nor the police have them. So for an incident like today, there's actually an armed response team. The guns are all locked up in police safes and all that sort of stuff. But they don't carry guns in their cars. They don't carry guns on their uniforms. And a lot of cases, like in Wellington, for example, they don't even carry batons or tasers. So their ability to, de-escalate conflict is much higher, which is something that I think groups like BLM have been asking for in the United States, is perhaps we can have police that de-escalate situations rather than just jumping for a gun. But we do have a less armed population as well. So again, it's a balancing act.
And one of the cool things that types of guns owned as well. You don't own semi-automatics. You own shotguns, maybe a rifle, but because in the States you don't need a semi-automatic to kill a rattlesnake or even a mountain lion. Although maybe with a mountain lion you would want one.
But the semi-automatics are more fun because they go da 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 da.
Oh, I was going to say that. Yeah, I completely agree, and I really, just as Shaquille said, hope that this does not put a stain on anything thought about New Zealand, but I don't think it will, because your average American, or just especially in the techie nerd community, we know New Zealand from Lord of the Rings, Flight of the Conchords, Star Wars, and those are our imagery. That's the image that we see every time when we think about New Zealand. Flight of the Conchords, if you hadn't seen it, is one of the greatest comedies. The actual individuals that come out of Flight of the Conchords, one of the guys, he was actually in Moana. Speaking of Hawaii, he was the voice of the crab.
That's right.
So yeah,
New Zealand has more sheep
One
than
of
they
the
have
issues.
people. Come on. Let's just get
It's
real.
one of the issues that New Zealand's
No
going
one
to
lives
face.
there. It's a bunch of sheep.
One of the issues that New Zealand's going to face, though, is that the number one tourists to New Zealand aren't coming from America. They're coming from Australia. Is obviously the number one group of people that have an economic impact on New Zealand, followed by other countries in the South Pacific, followed by countries like Singapore and Hong Kong, who have direct flights into there, and the UK that also has direct flights into New Zealand. And the problem is that when you see a situation such as the Christchurch mosque shooting, where 51 people, I think it was, lost their lives and some 40 or 50 people were injured, the debate that was going on between Australia and New Zealand was the fact that an Australian man had actually flown over to New Zealand and acquired a gun, and he couldn't do the crime in Australia because he couldn't get hold of the gun in the first place. And unfortunately, that led to New Zealand strengthening their gun rules, where really it was, again, just one person that did something wrong. And so it becomes difficult because then somebody from Singapore might say, oh, is Australia therefore a safer place to visit than New Zealand, without actually understanding all of the other nuances. And that's what I mean when I say I really hope it doesn't tarnish their reputation.
Well, one of the things that I've heard, and I'd love to hear, definitely, in just following the joint coverage and the fact that y'all are doing it as a joint venture, is that apparently both teams are hoping that they will be the team that wins, and that is the host team. And apparently, which I did not realize, the last time the host team won was when the U.S. won the Women's World Cup, and that's been several years back. So I do know that when I was reading up on the game, both I guess New Zealand and Australia, and you would know better than I do because you do have some ties to the sporting world there as well, Shaquille. I guess you both have relatively strong teams and could be threats. I mean, of course, there are powerhouses like the U.S. and I guess Brazil is a powerhouse, and others, and definitely in the European theater. But it does seem like y'all have at least a shot, meaning Australia and New Zealand, of winning, because both of the countries have said that they feel that they could pull it off as the host country, and it's been a while since the host country has won. So how strong are the teams is I guess what I'm asking, because it definitely seems like they are both thinking that they have a shot.
Well, I think Australia and New Zealand always produces great athletes. And I think even when you look at our Olympic results, we really hold our own. We get a lot more medals per capita than I think most other countries do. So I wouldn't underestimate the girls in New Zealand. I certainly wouldn't underestimate the Matildas in Australia. I wish them both well. I won't make any commentary on who's going to win it or whether they're better or worse than other teams, but it certainly would be great for either Australia or New Zealand to take home the trophy.
I will admit,
the Lionesses.
I will say it would be great for Australia and New Zealand. However, it also would be great for the U.S. since Megan Rapinoe is retiring this year. So that's, I'm hoping she goes out on top.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
I think we all have, Jatovi, we all have our stories. Every team has a great story behind it. Each player has a great story. So, and you guys win enough stuff. So just stay up there in the Northern Hemisphere. We're taking this one.
Well, we'll see what happens in that regard. Kim had sent me an article, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. And I see Kim's here, and she may decide to jump on the conversation, but she sent it to me a few days ago and asked me if I would bring it up and everything. But it is actually revolving around the military and what the military chooses to spend its money on. But apparently there is a representative, Summerlee, a Democrat out of Pennsylvania, that has called out the military's annual budget. And apparently one of the things that they are spending their money on, and I'd love to hear, since a lot of times you talk about mismanagement and the misuse of money, but apparently, according to what Kim sent me and what the article is about, we're spending $41 million on Viagra. Is what Kim sent me the article on and everything. But I just wondered what your thoughts are on that, because that was something that she brought up doing a congressional hearing with the Department of Defense Director of Contracting on last Thursday. So it was happening last Thursday. And like I said, she asked me to, and I will be trying to reach out to Summerlee to see if she can come on and maybe share some of her thoughts around this. But apparently that's a pretty decent amount of money to be spending on Viagra for our military generals and whoever else might be using it and all along those lines. So any thoughts, since you oftentimes write about the misuse, and that definitely seems like a serious misuse in my mind, but any thoughts around this, Debbie? Because I'm going like 41 million on Viagra. Do we have a counter? Are they spending it on birth control and some of the other things that they could be spending it on as well? But what's your thoughts, Debbie?
Well, yeah, the first thing that came to mind for me was, so what's the spending on birth control? What's the spending on abortions? What's the spending? And isn't Viagra, unless it's a legitimate medical problem, which it probably is in most cases, many cases, isn't Viagra sort of something like entertainment, or does it really come under? I don't think it should be funded. No, buy your own stuff.
Yeah, that's what I say. Buy your own stuff. But hey, I can stir the pot a little bit since you guys are being pretty boring.
Yeah,
tonight.
stir it.
Well, I thought I was stirring the pot as well, but go ahead.
Shaquille and Jacoby are going to go at each other. But let me tell you what's happening in the United States of America. Maybe not so much in Australia. There's a movie coming out called the Barbie movie. Mm-hmm. All right. And the conservatives are totally against this movie. Part of it is because of the feminist agenda that does that. And the other problem is the trans Barbie. One of the Barbies is actually a transgender man who pretends to be a woman in Barbie. So this movie has been deemed morally objectionable by all, and no one should go see it. So with that, Jacoby, here comes the stirring of the pot, baby. What are your thoughts about Barbie movie and the agenda?
There is no agenda. It's actually, it looks like a great movie. I'm actually going to take my daughter to see that movie.
No, you
got plans
you don't understand. It is morally objectionable by all. There's a trans Barbie in there.
Hey, nobody boycotted Mrs. Doubtfire. Nobody boycotted Bugs Bunny. Everybody's still watching the classic cartoons, and nobody turned out to be transgender or cross-dressing based on those.
Jacoby and Miss Doubtfire, everybody acknowledged it was a man. It was in women's clothes. It wasn't a woman. It wasn't someone pretending. It wasn't someone identifying.
A person who is pretending to be a, I don't know. He's a Barbie.
It's a Barbie doll. Lee, you had a real person that was cross-dressing.
There was an entire TV show from back in the 70s where they literally pretended and cross-dressed and everything. I think the TV show, if I remember it correctly, Jacoby, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was called Bosom Buddies, and they literally dressed the entire time in order to masquerade, in order to try to get by, for lack of a better term, and everything.
All I can say, if you're listening to this on the radio, and I did hear this on iHeartRadio the other day, Mark, okay, and Spotify, and you're a conservative, this is not the movie to send your children. This is an agenda-driven movie, okay? So stay away from Barbie. It's not a Barbie movie.
Kim hasn't come. Hold on a second. Kim has not come on yet. So let's hear from Debbie, who is the woman representative of what's going on. Hold on a second, Toby. And Nick, I want to hear from Debbie. Debbie, what's your thoughts about this movie and the movie controversy? Because Debbie, you're there in California, and there's also a mixture of two movies together, because there's a nickname, and I forgot the nickname, but they are totally different movies, because one of the movies is actually a Oppenheimer or something like that, but there's Barbieheimer, which is what people are calling the folks that are going to see both movies together. So there's also this slang term that is out there where people are going to see two diametrically opposed movies in the sense of what the message is or what the storyline is, but they are thinking that it will be fun, and there's a whole Jacoby, am I not correct in thinking there's a whole hashtag that's out there, and it's called Barbieheimer, Barbieheimer or something like that, where they are going to see two movies together that are totally different. But Debbie, I turn it over to you.
Well, I was a problem child. I didn't like dolls. So I wasn't the ordinary little girl. And the whole concept of a Barbie movie just grosses me out, frankly. It kind of makes me feel sick to my stomach. However, now that I've heard from Nick, and now that I know that, is it Jacoby? I don't know how to pronounce your name.
Jacoby.
Jacoby. Now that Jacoby's taking his daughter, I have to see it, of course. So you gentlemen have convinced me that I've got to go see this movie.
I'll add another flame to the fire because of this left wing agenda. Barbie was actually banned currently in Vietnam. And part of the reason why it was banned in Vietnam, they actually had a map in the back, which had the little dotted lines that separated Vietnam from China. And they deemed this to be anti-Vietnamese. And because of that, Barbie is now, the movie's banned in Vietnam. So I would not be surprised if the other countries start banning the Barbie movie for various different reasons. It's become a political agenda. The conservatives have already banned it. Vietnam's banned it, and we're going to watch more and more.
Nick, hold on a second. I want to direct something to Debbie again, because that's actually where I was going to go. Some of the news items that I was talking about, you said I was being tame, but some of the news items I was talking about, we're talking about the treatment of women in society in other parts of the world, and we don't have different rules. Different societies have different rules and different thoughts about the way that they treat women, and sometimes we are thinking that there need to be universal rules and all, but some of the Western rules may not fit in with the other nations' cultures. And I'm just being honest and very transparent and everything. But what is your thoughts about women's rights and women's rights being activated in other parts of the globe? Because there are definitely places that have different thoughts about a number of things, whether that is LGBTQI rights or a number of other things that exist, and their philosophies are not necessarily the same as ours. And I haven't done enough world traveling, but I know that there are people like you, Nick, people like Shaquille, that have traveled the world. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, Debbie. And you've traveled the world as well. You just mentioned that you were in the UK and other places. But how do you feel we are doing with global women's rights, and should it be an issue that we are concerned about globally?
Yeah, and I think that really is what's behind my objection to Barbie, is the whole, and apparently they've made her politically correct now. So, okay, too much, too little, too late. And I'm opposed to censorship of any kind. And I will sometimes watch films with a political agenda, left or right, because I want to understand people's thought processes and what it is that's winding them up, or what it is that they want to say. So much for let's Barbie's getting a lot of attention, so more people will watch now. Yeah, I haven't been in Asia. I've been in Africa, the Middle East, and Europe, and of course Mexico, US, and Canada. And gosh, I don't even know what to say. As far as transgender is concerned, I can remember the first time I ever saw someone transgender, and I remember being almost frightened. I was, I think, 17, because it was this anomaly. There was someone who was supposed, looked like, was one thing apparently, but was acting like another thing, and it kind of freaked me out. And so and now it doesn't. And because it's more usual, we've talked about it, it's out in the open. And I think it's a good thing for us to be open about, or maybe it was crossed. Oh, I don't know what it was, what he or she, who they were or what they were. But I think that it's better for these things to be out in the open, because it does exist. It is there. And I think it's really important for us to be open about who we are and why we're that way, and be free to talk about it and understand one another.
Hey, along those same lines, I know that you wrote a book and you actually put out some initiatives as well. And I did see the book behind you, and I'd love to hear more about that book and whether it is one of your own or whether it's just a philosophy that you have. And that's that book called Wickedly Smart Women and everything. And one of the things that I've heard you talk about, and definitely in not just this format, but other formats, is the need for more women leadership and all in that space. So as the representative of the women's voice here, I'd love to hear your thoughts about that, because I remember reading and going back over some of the things both that you talked about here as well as just in general. And I know that you are a proponent of more women in office, because maybe we're not seeing enough representative voices of women in the different lanes, whether that's local, national, or on different other levels, even worldwide, even though there have been some worldwide leaders. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, because it is a issue that you have talked about publicly and everything. So I'd love to hear some of your reasons for thinking we need more women leadership.
Yes, I wrote a chapter in Wickedly Smart Women, which is a book that was initiated by Hartwell. I'm trying to remember her first name, but I just love the whole concept, Wickedly Smart Women. She does a really fun podcast and a lot of counseling and coaching, amazing woman. And I was really amazed. She wanted me to write about corruption. So I had 2,500 words to write about the corruption that I'd found. And what I discovered was that although it was 50% men and women who fought against the corruption in my community, the ones in office, the ones who changed it were the women in office. They took the men with them, or the men went with them to change it. And I thought, that's really interesting. I wonder if that happens everywhere, if that was only in where I am. So I Googled it and I realized that it's a thing. It's a phenomenon that around the world where you have women on boards, those boards are financially significantly more sound, and there is significantly less corruption. And in fact, in Mexico, they actually were putting women in office because they wanted to stop corruption. Now women can't stop cartels. So that's a little bit like, shooting a BB gun at a lioness. But and you'd be surprised in places. Arab Emirates has, I think, 54% women in office, and so Costa Rica has 50% or maybe 51% women in office. Places that you wouldn't expect, and the United Nations has been doing a happiness study since 2006, and what they've discovered is that there are huge correlations between women in office and less corruption. But the really wonderful correlation is that those countries where there are more women in office, where it's nearer 50%, it's averaging 44%, those are the countries where consistently the citizens rate themselves as happier, men and women. And there are some other interesting correlations. Those are also the countries that have a significantly higher rate of immigration, but the immigrants are integrated into the communities. They're not ghettoed off. They're actually integrated. And again, everybody's happier. So there's some really interesting findings from those studies. And yes, so, what occurs to me is if there's a really simple solution, if we would like to be happier, we need to get more women into office.
I'm sorry, can I just one quick question, Debbie? Does that hold true for America, also Washington politics? Do you see that with our congressmen, representatives, vice presidents, whatever, that it's cleaner, it's more honest than...
I don't think you can necessarily narrow it down to individuals, and because of course there are women who are corrupt. There's some issues with one of the Scottish women leaders and her husband, and there are studies that show that women, if they want to stay in office, have to go to the dark side. But it's so I wouldn't necessarily play it to specifics, but it is generally statistically true.
Interesting.
Isn't that kind of a sexist statement to make? In other words,
I think so.
Generalization that women are more, better, less corrupt.
Well, I'm not saying that women are less corrupt, because I don't think the psychology supports that women are less corrupt necessarily. And women and men may be corrupt in different areas in different ways, and it's probably a lot of cultural and social issues around the world. It's when there are women in office, there is less corruption. And that is, those are legitimate, empirical, and peer-supported, reviewed studies.
I mean, the vast majority of people in jails are males.
Is there a way? Because if we look at our society, I mean, this is a global society as a whole being a patriarchy. Is that as women climb the ladder in these in these areas, even in the U.S., is that pushback against women climbing that ladder part of the death rattle of the patriarchy, where we'll have more equality across the board?
Of course it is. People don't like change. Women don't like change either. There's pushback from women as well as men. Yes, there's always going to be pushback when there's change. And there's going to be a learning curve for women because they haven't been in positions of leadership. It's the same with any group that's been underrepresented. And, if you look at it, just look at it from another way. The United States, our democracy is based on equal representation. So what's going on here? Why do we only have 28% women elected when we're 51% of the population? That's not the American dream. That's not our value system.
But aren't women voting for men?
That's a problem, isn't it? That's the
Not
question.
necessarily if that's who they want to vote for.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Vote for who you want to vote for. I'm suggesting rethink it. Rethink it.
And it sounds like you're also suggesting more women run and everything. But
Of course.
Debbie, there is a question that was asked, and I've definitely seen this in the corporate world, and we've actually had discussions around this on other things. So I'm actually going to frame it in two parts. One is, I think it's Kim that's actually asking your question, because I've seen it in various business aspects. What are your thoughts about the way women are treated in businesses in the U.S. versus men? And also when sometimes, that was the other question, they will see a woman in leadership and will go around to the secondary person or the third person who is a man because they don't have enough respect for the woman leader. And I'm kind of paraphrasing what Kim was asking, but it is a fair question and all along those lines. And if I can add a third thing, I'd love to hear your thoughts about the pay gap, the wage gap, because that is something that we hear about and we've been hearing about for decades. But I'd love to hear your thoughts, and then maybe Shaquille or others might chime in. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about what is always being talked about, which is the pay gap that exists even in the C-suites and some of the other leadership spaces.
Well, clearly it's wrong. And I was really interested yesterday. I was listening to a gentleman who's written about corruption in corporations and government, and some really interesting suggestions on how to resolve it, and had made some of the observations I've made in some of my books on leadership and corruption and power. And I think that this is something I wasn't aware of, but he was saying, and he's out of the University of London. I'll find his name here and bring it up in a second. But I was listening to it all day yesterday, and there are studies that do show that if you take applications and take the names off of them, and everything else is equal, and then you throw a name on it that's clearly either racially or nationally identifiable or gender identifiable, there is a significant bias toward white men. And so it does exist. Oh, well, we know it exists. Let's be honest. We know it exists. It's obvious. It's all around.
Isn't that not easy to change though?
The View all the time.
Everyone just get a number and it's blind.
I see that in The View all the time. There's a lot of white men on The View. Wait, there isn't any. They're all women. Okay.
Sorry,
I
didn't hear what you said.
I mean, the thing is, what is this thing that there's this big attack on white men? I just don't get it.
No, it's not. And suggesting that
women are supposed to be wonderful and
equality isn't an attack on white men.
Yeah,
it's an opportunity for women.
Why isn't there one white man on The View? Why are they all women?
Gosh.
Well, Nick, the vast majority of
CBS get some form of diversity. In other words, and they're not.
Nick, here's a question for you then, because if we're arguing
biased against white men, that's the reason.
If we're
they watch Fox.
But Nick, hold on real quick, Mark. Just a real quick thing, Nick. You're saying that it's biased against white men.
Yes.
So if you're saying that 80% right now on TV or even Fortune 500 companies have 80% white men, and these companies end up hiring women, is that biased against white men by trying to diversify their?
Go look at CBS is one of the most biased agenda media companies in the world.
But why are you saying it's
white men being on, and they push their own
Nick
liberal agenda out there? And the thing is, and that's the reason people watch Fox, is because the thing is what they
so you're saying that the people that watch Fox only want to see white men on there.
Well, the thing is, they're underrepresented on CBS, ABC, and NBC.
They're not underrepresented.
So go watch it.
They're not underrepresented. The majority of newscasters and people out there are white men.
They're not white men.
Yes,
they are. Tell you that right now. Ain't there, buddy? Go.
Are half of them women? On
The View, it's 100% women.
But that's one show.
They take the white man and they push him down. And
that's one show.
And become Republicans. What do you think?
That's one. You're saying one show is what represents all of TV.
Go look at CBS Morning. Go look at Sunday Morning. Go look at all their shows.
The vast majority of newscasters are white men.
There aren't any.
No,
If they are, they're a token minority. You know, and that's
CNN has
Jacoby,
a
and so that's
ton.
the reason you
Fox
have to
has a
So
ton.
can we move on? Can we move on,
Has
Jacoby?
a
It's
ton.
because
hold on,
you
Jacoby,
can-
Jacoby, hold on a second. Jacoby and Nick,
like us,
hold on.
folks,
Jacoby and Nick, I
yes,
want to hear from Shaquille and I want to
so
hear
we
from
watch
Debbie.
Fox. What do
Hang
you
on a
think?
second. I want to hear from Shaquille and I
No,
want to hear from Debbie.
we got it right. Nick says
We're
that white men
representative.
dominate. White men don't dominate the airwaves. Jacoby says that they do. Okay, cool. We got it. You guys aren't agreeing. Just I want to go way back to when I first started trying to say something.
We don't have Australians on either.
You mentioned before about Viagra being just for entertainment purposes.
Entertainment.
Well, I would argue a couple of things there. One, that if a military person is unable to achieve that entertainment because of PTSD or because of other psychological factors, because what they've been exposed to, I don't think it's unreasonable for the military to spend that money. I agree with you on women's healthcare issues. I won't weigh in on the US abortion debate, but women's healthcare issues, things like sanitary items every month, I actually think that they should be subsidized for everybody in the country, your country and mine. So, I do think that's actually important. Back to Barbie, we were told that this was one of the most iconic things in film was our gorgeous Australian girl, Margot Robbie, on her tiptoes as she came out of the high heels. I mean, I'm not going to go watch it, not because it's feminist or there's trans people in it, because I didn't like Barbie when I was a kid. I thought when I saw the girls in neighborhood playing with them, it was the most boring thing that I ever could imagine. The only thing I ever did with a Barbie girl was look up her dress to see that she didn't have any knickers on. That was the most entertaining thing that I found about Barbies when I was a child, right? So, and I can't imagine that scene is going to be in the movie. So, given that's the case, I don't think I'm going to be bothering to go watch it. And I'm fascinated to hear the comments that essentially sound to me like, well, because conservatives don't like the fact that there's a trans character in it and they don't want their children exposed to something that they've already said they don't want their children exposed to, I'm going to go and watch it. Because the conservatives don't like it, I'm going to race out and watch the thing. I think that's just silly. Personally, that's my opinion. And then back to this issue about women being involved on boards. It's great for women to be on boards. I encourage that. I think that it's in those countries where women have been able to get into positions of leadership, they've been able to make a very positive contribution. The problem that I see today is that what we in the West are doing is saying, well, because it's a good idea for women to be able to work their way up, and these are women that oftentimes are pioneering women because they've had to overcome a lot of challenges to get there. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say that all boards should be made up of women, that we should take women who aren't qualified for the position and put them there because that's just going to improve things. Or we hear arguments like, well, white men have been in power for such a long time, so we're just trying to equalize things by preferencing women or minority groups into these positions. But the thing is that if you put that preference quota in, what you're doing is you're hurting the young white person who has nothing to do with what happened 50 years ago or 100 years ago or 500 years ago for that matter. So I think, again, everything has everything has a balance to it that you have to try to get right. And the way that I have seen statistics and numbers completely misused to prove this point when it's not necessary. We can all agree that women do find it harder to get the same sort of pay as men. Now, whether that's because they're not as good at negotiating generally with their employers, whether it be because that they are negotiating non-financial benefits, all those sorts of factors are never taken into consideration. Let's have a look at something like pediatrics. They looked at this with doctors and they said, well, female doctors earn substantially less than their male counterparts. What they left out of that was that female doctors tend to go into fields like maternity type things, pediatrics, that type of stuff. Dermatology is very popular amongst women. Those things generally pay a little bit lower than neurosurgery, heart surgery, those types of fields. So, the sort of idea that it's just white men, and also just, Debbie, to your comment before that the US, was meant to be an inclusive place. maybe theoretically it was, but when did you get universal? But when did you get universal suffrage? When in the founding of the United States, not everybody could vote. Not even all men could vote, right? And then you sort of got all voting. Then you got women's voting. Then you got black voting. So it's never really been an equal country, and there's a lot of overhangs from the past that the United States has to deal with, as does every other country on earth. But I think that we need to do so in a balanced way, and I think that a lot of people feel that they're just constantly attacked and they're constantly lectured to over things that they didn't do themselves and over ideals that they don't hold themselves.
Shaquille, just a follow-up question, Shaquille, going on the pay gap.
Hold on a second. There was a question for Debbie, and I think it's coming from Kim. So I was going to ask the question for Kim, since perhaps she can't get on camera. But Debbie, the question is, do you think the glass ceiling still exists for women, or is it still a carbide stainless steel ceiling instead? So what are your thoughts about the glass ceiling? And that may even answer part of what Shaquille is talking about as well. But that is something that Kim put in the chat. So I am playing translator.
Well, bias exists. It's inevitable. I'm biased. We're all biased. And I think the whole point of diversity is to do exactly what we're doing right now. Bias is about perceptions. And there were some figures put into the chat, and I Googled really quickly, and Pew says that 76% of all reporting journalists are white, 8% Hispanic, 6% Black, 3% Asian. And that aligns closely with previous research. And the large portion of newsrooms employees are white, higher than the share of U.S. workers overall who are white. So perceptions might be that we're no longer the majority in journalism. The fact is we are still. And I say we because I'm white. So I lost track of what the other question was, but let's look at the facts and perceptions. And the whole point of diversity is that we speak to one another and we have these conversations. We talk about how we feel, because that's how we get it better. And regardless of how we have misbehaved in the past, the ideals and the values that we espouse that have helped us to do better have been those ideals of equality. And that's what I'm espousing.
So just to tag on to that real quick. Oh, I was just going to tag on to that real quick, because I think one of the things, Shaq, that you brought up, which also I think we can all agree on, is we all want equality. We all really want everybody to.
No, I don't.
No, we don't. Only of opportunity, not of results.
I don't want equality. I think equality is a terrible idea. But continue.
So we don't all want equal opportunity?
Opportunity, yes, but it ends there.
Yeah, and that's
results.
what everybody wants. That's exactly what everybody wants, is that equal opportunity. I want the equal opportunity if in the tech industry, as somebody who's going out for the same position that I'm going out for, who may be white, who may be female, who may be Hindu, who may be, I want that same equal opportunity as everybody else. But as we all know, just as pointed out historically, we're not there based on our history. Because there were individuals where, women just got the right to vote just recently.
Recently? What year?
100 years ago, in the 20s, depending on the state.
That's a long time ago, Jacoby.
There are people. My father went to jail marching for me to be able to go to a white school. So
what year was that?
Lee, don't.
What year? I believe you, and that's sad. What year was that?
That was back in the 50s.
Okay, we're far from that. Very far from that.
Not far, Lee.
Not in our hearts.
We are not. I just got the opportunity to marry my wife, who is white, in the 80s. Interracial relationships weren't legal until then. So we have to stop saying that it's so far in the past when it wasn't. It is in our recent. People who are living today have lived through going to jail for marching for rights.
I get that. I grew up in Jim Crow South. I get it.
Had he not been murdered. So we keep saying this. It's so far in the past. It's so far in the past.
Mr. Toby,
so what I'm trying to get to is that. Wait, let me finish real quick, Shaq, and I'll let you go. What I'm trying to get to is we cannot ignore there's still inequalities for opportunity today in our society today, and it's
Let's
not.
work on those.
And that's what we're
Yes.
trying to work on, to fix those inequalities of opportunity. Today, we have to search through equity. We have
Okay,
to
No,
allow
what is equity?
Hang
Hold
on,
on a
let me
second.
respond, please. Let me
equity.
respond, please.
If
No,
we
hold on a
know
second.
that,
Keep going, Jacob. Keep going. You've got 5 minutes.
No,
Keep going.
no, Shaquille. I want to hear Shaquille's point of view, and then we can get to a definition and everything. And I think Steve's going to close us out shortly anyway. Shaquille, your point that you're getting to respond to.
Well, first of all, the conversation I think came off the back of Barbie. Okay. Now, slavery in the United States, whilst it is somewhat relatable to the rest of us, we don't fully understand it. Even those of us like me who's traveled to the United States, I don't really get it because obviously we never had it in Australia, and in Europe they'd ended it, a long time before it was really ended in the United States. So it's an issue that is somewhat unique to the American experience, and I think that when you combine that issue in with other issues like the issues with women and issues with other minorities, the conversation ends up becoming quite clouded with all these other issues. There's not really a direct connection between, in my opinion, say, black slavery issues in the United States and the gender pay gap in Australia. Like the connection isn't there. When you guys bring it together like that, it really clouds and just makes the issues so much more enormous. So, of course, there's the women were behind. I don't think that's because of this narrative of the patriarchy. For most of human history and relatively recent human history, that was all we could afford to do. The men went and worked, the women stayed home and looked after the 12 kids that they had. I mean, that was something that was very common. Just like it was very common that once a girl got to around 12, she'd be married. And in the United States, you guys made a movie about this in the 40s, trying to raise the marriage age from 12 to 14. So, I mean, the idea that this has just been this deliberate desire to oppress women that's still carrying on today, I don't really think that holds true. And when it comes to the issues of equality, someone like myself, who was born in the 80s and went to school in the late 80s and early 90s, or through the 90s until I finished high school, we were told there was no difference, that we should treat each other equally. And then when I grow up, I'm being told, well, you need to treat people equally by treating them differently. Right, and this is what you're saying. You say you want to have an equal opportunity to work in tech or whatever other field, Jatovi, but that's not what's happening. What's happening is we've got preferred quotas, and if you happen to fit into one of these categories, you have a preferential treatment versus an equal treatment, and I don't want that, and I don't want equal. And just as a side note, I don't want equality because I think equality ignores diversity. And I don't actually even want equal opportunity because I don't think it works. Not because I don't think it's fair, I don't think it works.
Just to point out, equal opportunity is all that everyone is asking for. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't trying to bring in the slavery thing. The whole notion was trying to point out we do not have equality in America at this moment, especially in the women's arena. And how you just pointed out, historically, as we've thought about women, we forget about in Marvel when they released Black Panther. Well, actually, even in the comic books, what they had pointed out, they created this group of female warriors called the Dora Milaje. Well, the Dora Milaje was based off an African warrior tribe. That it was actually a real tribe. So we don't think of women as fighters. We don't think of women as this way because historically we've thought about women a particular way, that they have to be the food bearers, the home bodies to take care of this and take care of that. Well, in nature, and even if you go into the nature of it, and we talked about lionesses, well, you know who actually did the hunting in nature? The lionesses did the hunting, not the lions. So what I'm trying to get to is that our view, and I think what Debbie pointed out earlier, is changing our mindset and changing our thought process of how we see women in particular, because that could help us in terms of helping women break that glass ceiling, because women
the problem with what you're suggesting, the problem with what you're suggesting and what Debbie's suggesting, though, is that you're taking women, and instead of saying, let's create jobs and opportunities based on women's natural talents and interests and men's natural talents and interests as a group, We're taking women and saying, let's treat women like they're men. And
No,
women
we're not
often-
saying that. You're putting words in our mouth.
Not at all.
That's what happens.
We're not
That's how
saying
women
what
are being
we're saying.
treated.
No. Shaquille, you're putting words in our mouths. Don't tell us what we're saying. Let us tell you. And what I want to
I see
say
the
to all of
problem.
you is, don't you dare give me a job because I'm a woman. You give me a job because I'm as good or better. Period.
And that
I
is
agree with
where
you. I
that's
absolutely
where-
Don't
agree with you.
insult me.
But Shaq, that's
But that, I
where
agree with you.
Yeah, but Shaq, what I'm trying to say to you, and this is where it gets back to the equality of opportunity and the equity. Women aren't getting that opportunity. And this is where that equity comes into play. And this is why I brought up, I know we had discussed something similar before, or a discussion similar, where in the NFL as an idea to help out African American coaches, even though it's still lagging behind because of the population that is in the NFL and so on and so forth. They created what's called the Rooney Rule. The Rooney Rule gave an opportunity for the black coaches to go in front of those white owners and have that opportunity. It wasn't saying, I'm going to give you the job because you're black. It's because I'm going to give you the opportunity, which they were not getting before. So in society, what we're actually asking for
But
to get
again,
that
that's
equal
a different issue,
opportunity for
Jacoby.
women especially is to
Jacoby,
give
but hang
them
on,
that,
hang on.
give them that
That is a-
chance. That's
that is
not
a different
saying,
issue.
hey, you can have a job.
That is a different issue. You've got a situation in the United States where the majority of people graduating high school are girls. The highest grades are being given to girls, are being earned by girls. More females are graduating universities and college than males are. Okay, and between the ages of, I think it's up to 35 or 40, college graduate girls or young ladies are actually earning more than the male counterparts. I think it's just folly to start saying that you're going to ignore it. You can do. I'll send you the stats if you're not sure. I've looked these up. Okay, I think it's folly to just keep trying to suggest that there has been no changes, and we're acting as though there are no changes or nothing positive that's occurred. Now, Debbie, I agree with you. Okay, that yes, you should be not given the job because you're a woman, and you should not be not given the job because you're a woman. But that's not how these things are playing out in the workplace. We are seeing lobby groups go and approach companies and say, here are the demographics of your area. And based on the demographics of your area, you've got 50% women and 50% men, but you've got 55% of your workforce as men, etc. And they're breaking it down like that, as if every company is supposed to 100% adhere to this geographic makeup or the makeup of the area. That's just not possible. People are going to move in and out of different industries.
I can see the misconception.
A problem that can't be fixed.
I see the misconception where you're missing it. So again, it's not when you're reading the stats and saying that, hey, now we're going to fill this quota. I guess this will lead to a question. Hey, I can fill this quota just to hire this woman. Are you saying that woman who they hire to quote unquote fill the quota is not qualified for that position?
I didn't say anything that could even be remotely interpreted as that.
No, I'm just asking the question because
no, I've answered this question before. If you have a race quota without referencing anything else, what you do is you get the wealthiest corporations and the biggest, most prestigious universities. They will go out and they will take the cream off that minority group, and the people that you were trying to help are still left behind. See, I'm more of an advocate for equal opportunity than you are because I care about the people that are left behind. And that program just doesn't work.
I don't know if you are or not.
Because of how you've done on previous shows.
So again, yeah, don't tell us how that you're so much better than we are. That's not really something that's possible. Where we
Yeah,
but you don't know that.
You don't know what we do.
Debbie, with due respect, I didn't direct the comment to you. I just directed it to Toby.
But you're saying Debbie and I are in agreement here, and you're stating the same thing. If you're trying
to Toby, really quickly, because we're getting ready to wind down very shortly. But one of the things that I will agree, and this may surprise Shaquille and everything with, and I'd love to hear Debbie's thoughts about this. A couple of things. One, I hope Debbie will be back on tomorrow because I do think that there is a issue that goes on globally where some of the, and I kind of alluded to earlier, some of the women's rights are not seen in the same way in certain countries as they are in our country and everything, because definitely there are things that are not acceptable totally here. Like there would not, like if a woman was attacked, as was apparently happened, I believe it was in India that I mentioned earlier and everything, there would be a serious uprising. And I'm not saying that there isn't an uprising in India. I've got to follow more of that story, but I don't know, because of the different cultural things that go on, that the things that happen in one part of the world are necessarily going to be the same as in this part of the world. So Debbie, I hope that you'll join us back on Friday if you can, and definitely I'll continue sending you the invite. So whenever you can come on, I appreciate your commentary and your thoughts and everything when you can join us and all. But the other thing that I was going to say that to Shaquille is that I am, and I think even Jatovia and me have had conversations both online and offline about the fact that yes, there is a notion of people that are checking the box, and that is a problem that exists, because there are people that literally will find somebody that is a disabled, Black, gay, whatever, and then you can check off about 5 or 6 boxes and everything, and that can be problematic, because that is on the corporate side, because they are sitting there going that checking the box thing, which is problematic in that sense. And I do agree with you on that. I don't know if Jatovia agrees with me, but we've had conversations about it on online and offline where people will check the box.
But that's not the point that I've been trying to make on previous shows. Kim, Debbie, this is not directed at you. I have sat here show after show after show and talked about the minority groups that are left behind, and then I've been labelled somebody who is pushing white supremacist talking points. I've been constantly told.
Let's hold that discussion for off the air.
That's why I make the comment that I actually do care very deeply about these issues, and if I see a program not working, I'm trying to explain why I think the program doesn't work. And then what ends up happening is that people think that that's a political thing. So Labor Party people and Democrats will often jump behind the program, not behind the actual issue itself, but just defend the program and ignore where the program doesn't work as if these programs are perfect. They're not. So if they're not working as well as we want them to, why wouldn't we talk about it and improve them? And that just doesn't seem to happen. So that's why I made the comment that I made previously.
Fair enough. But Debbie, any thoughts and everything before we get out of here? And like I said, I hope that you'll come back tomorrow.
Thank you, Shaquille, for explaining that. And I think that I will come back. I'll get up at 3 a.m. to have these conversations, because the whole point of diversity is not ratios. The point of diversity is these conversations, because we learn to understand one another and understand why we feel so strongly about the things we feel so strongly about. And that's how it gets better. So thank you, all of you, for your comments.
Agreed. And like I said, hopefully we'll see you tomorrow. We'll see everybody else, and we'll continue the discussion on tomorrow as well as other discussions. I do know we have guests coming up, not just you, Debbie, but others, but I don't think there are any more this week. I think they're scheduled for next week or the week after, and all along those lines. We actually got somebody from the evangelical community that'll be coming. I think that's on the 25th. I got to double check, or the 31st, and all along those lines. But we'll definitely continue these discussions. But right now we're getting ready to get out of here. I mentioned Barbara earlier and her show, which I think is a rerun, will be coming on at 12 o'clock. And then later on, I know Nick and Peter Bennett will be having the Wall Street Hacker coming our way at 1 o'clock. So there are all kinds of great programming happening here regularly on the Pod TV. So that'll be continuing even on this particular Thursday. But right now, we're getting ready to get out of here for World Edition. And we'll see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock with more discussions around world events. So glad to see you. And we're about to get ready to get on out of here.